Have young people lost their African identity to Western ways? Well, good evening and welcome to Sunday Live. I am your host, Dumelo Motodwane. Well, the month of September is Heritage Month in South Africa, and it's a perfect time to reflect on our roots, our culture, as well as our true identity. Now, the issue of identity is a sensitive topic, especially amongst Black people, as often Black people in South Africa are accused of not being African enough by adopting Western practices such as wearing weaves, bleaching their skin, and preferring to speak more English than their vernacular languages. Now, with that said, it's inevitable that we live in a world where young people consume more of pop culture through the media than education about their African-ness. So we've invited a panel to take us through this topic tonight. But before we delve into our conversation, let's take a look at this brief insert prepared by Refilwe Mwilo.
Identity, a concept linked to heritage and difficult to define, has undergone a paradigm shift in recent decades. In South Africa, with our multiple cultures and ethnicities, the seemingly simple question of who you are stirs a myriad of other questions.
I don't look at it as a continent for white people or Black people. It's just, and it's not about color. You understand? You get me? It's just about us coming together, brothers and sisters. We're all Africans.
Well, my children are Indian, but basically they don't embrace the South African culture because even at school, everything is very Western. All the media, all the programs, the games that they play, there's no South African culture and there's no Indian culture.
We, the adults, are to blame over that, including the systems, the political systems, because they are not doing anything to make sure that these youngsters grow up being proud of what they are.
I've got a daughter who is 12 years old. I always tell them that they have to be first conscious about themselves, love themselves first, and if they want to copy some Western cultures whatsoever with their hair or style, they mustn't actually dwell on that. Because now it's just to try other styles, but you have to know yourself and then be conscious with yourself and love yourself first.
In my heart, I'm a South African. I've been born here. My parents are from Zimbabwe, and their parents are from Zimbabwe. So in my heart, I'm an African. And I know that usually when somebody says an African, it refers to a Black person, and Europeans are referred to as a white person, but I don't relate to the term a European at all.
So, what then will it take to be proud enough, to be bold enough, to embrace who we are? For Sunday Live, my name is Refilwe Mwilo.
Well, a poll question for this evening is it a crisis if today's youth identifies more with the West than Africa? Well, of course, you can go to our social media pages. Facebook, we are Sunday Live on SABC 1. You can go to Twitter and tweet me at Sunday Live SABC 1 or at @T_Mututwani. And don't forget to hashtag Sunday Live SA. Now, we're not live this evening, and therefore we cannot make use of our SMS line nor our telephone lines. So we will only be able to communicate on social media, and therefore just engage there about the topic. But now in studio with us, we're joined by Ms. Kosi Giani, who is a psychologist, and we're also joined by Maite Makgoba, who's the founder of Mopi Mpopi, and we're also joined by a studio audience here with us just to comment and ask questions, relevant questions about issues of identity. So welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much to my panel as well for coming.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to pose the first question, to you, Kosi, regarding our poll question this evening, which is it a crisis if young people seem to tear more off and relate to the West than Africa?
I guess the question is, what is identity then, isn't it? Because, the world is evolving. Things are shifting all the time. And there was a time when identity was zoned off and it was geographical. And because geographical boundaries were very rigid, and we knew exactly where things are, and you had to be there physically in order to understand what's going on in a particular environment or area or country. And that's all the boundaries have come down. The geographical boundaries have come down due to developments, initiated by people that have brought the boundaries down. And it's no longer necessary to be in a country to know what's going on in a country. I mean, if there's a bomb going off in a country, we will know virtually instantly, therefore, it changes everything, totally. And, we then have the question. It brings a certain dilemma in terms of, so what does it mean for who we are? And are we now necessarily still defining ourselves by where we are.
Yeah.
When in fact, we have the whole world in the palm of our hands, literally. You know, and therefore, you know, we can talk about our identity from a genetic point of view, because you can talk about the genetics that we inherit, you know, that therefore identifies us as so-and-so's son or daughter, and therefore by going back in terms of your genetic lineage, you know. But then we talk about our social genetics as well, and this is, I guess, where we are.
Absolutely.
And in that social genetic space, we run into sensitivities, you know, around, as you've said, you know, people are wearing their weaves. And we get into personal spaces and so on. And it starts asking the question of, does a person have the right to decide how they want to look? And who are you to then tell me that,
how they should look?
Yeah, and therefore, because I'm not wearing my hair in this way or that way.
And I suppose issues of identity also come from some sort of, you know, desire to preserve where we come from.
Absolutely.
Especially as people.
There's a romanticism and a nostalgia to, oh, this is what our people did. You know, this is what our people did. And therefore, there's that wrestle between continuity with the past and change. You know, and therefore, society, we're always grappling with that. And all societies grapple with that. But more so, coming back to Africa, because in a lot of ways, Africa inherits what the rest of the world does.
Alrighty then. Well, my dear, welcome to Sunday Live. Now, you are the founder of Mopimpopi. But before we talk about Mopimpopi, I need us to see who this lady is, because I mean, really, South Africa, this diva right here, like this is the real Makoya right now. So this is Mopimpopi, at least one of the many Mopimpopis that you have designed. Tell us more about these ladies.
You know, the decision to come up with this creation is actually based on what we're discussing today. You know, being a new auntie, you know, having a little one, and there came a day when you hear the one saying, simply just lose each other. When I grew up, I want to be a white person. You know, it hits hard. It hits hard. You're starting to wonder, at the age of 4, they're starting to see something wrong with how they look, with you know, whether it be an outer or inner, their hair, the color of the skin. But I mean, from what they play with, you know, from the cartoons they watch to the characters they have on their clothing, nothing represents them. It simply just seems like there's nothing cool about being African. There's nothing okay about having this hair, having this skin, you know, and you realize how young it starts off. You know, at a very young age, they can, you know, as much as you just think, it's just a toy, but it gets in, it goes in. And that is why right now we are dealing with this culture of people fixing their blackness. You know, now you find that when people grow up now they've got the money now, they've got the, you know, the resources. Now they want to fix this problem that they have been facing. So it now presents it like there's something wrong. It's a burden because, you know, nothing in this world that is cool, that is hip, that is in it, you know, has, you know, even when you see black starlets from overseas, as soon as they get a media or as soon as they get that fame, now you see them going lighter, you know, like than what they came in is. They go lighter and lighter, or, you know, the hair gets fair and fair. So it's like, you know, you can't be the best and be this black or have this hard hair.
But what is blackness then? Because I see with the Mpopi that it's got afro hair, there's a crown, there's a beautiful dress, there are heels, there's makeup, you know, there's lipstick. What is blackness then?
You know, for me, the reason why I went this route, I mean, of course, there've always been black dolls. I mean, I don't know if people know this, but black dolls have been around. But, you know, there's just this one thing they just didn't catch on, you know? Kids will be like, don't want this one, you know, because they are fascinated by the glitz and the glamour. They like the sparkle, the glitz that other, you know, international competitors have or other international products have, which is not necessarily about that they are after the color of the skin or they're after the blonde hair or the blue eyes. They're just after that magic, because that's what kids like. They like fantasy, like magic, like something to be beautiful, whatever. Because they like to get lost in these worlds of theirs that only they live. They wish we could all go back there and stay there forever, right? So I wanted to give Mompi off as that black African princess. You can still be glamorous, you can still be beautiful, and keep your hair and keep your skin the way it is. So that's where I went from it, and that's why I kept it this way.
Well, Maite, you spoke about a very interesting analogy of how young children have a certain psyche in how they relate to dolls. And I'm interested to hear from you, because when we come back from the break, where that psychology and that psyche comes from. But of course, you need to also stay tuned and be a part of the conversation. We're asking, is it a crisis if today's youth identifies more with the West than with Africa? And of course, when we come back, we continue with our conversation and also engage with our audience members. We'll be right back. Welcome back. If you have just joined us, we are discussing issues of identity amongst the youth and asking whether it is a crisis if today's youth identifies more with the West than with Africa.
Amongst Africans, we like naming our kids after foreign cultures. I think that is the beginning of brainwashing them. Name them after their ancestors here so that they know who their ancestors are. And if they don't know, by the fact that you've given them a name that belongs to this place, it will compel them to find out who this person was.
We're going to engage our audience members now who's going to give us, just their opinions and questions. So thank you so much once again for coming, guys. We're talking about whether or not it's a crisis for young people to relate to the West than with Africans. And what are your views on that? Anyone?
My name is Litwanolo Maimani. I'm a student from the University of Johannesburg. In terms of young people looking towards the West, we must firstly analyze the context of Africa. Africa has been colonized for more than 3 centuries, if I may say so. And then when we say that we are looking towards the West, it's not because we are suffering from an identity crisis. It is because the West has infiltrated our roots. In South Africa, when I talk about identity, I talk about identity from 1652. What about my identity before 1652? After 1652, I was told about John van Riebeeck. That is the identity that I know. But what about the identity before 1652? Yeah. It means that there's no identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I think, number one, we also lose the plot when we talk of identity, because we want to talk of identity outside power. Because, like you're saying, we're consuming a lot of pop culture. But why do we consume that a lot of pop culture? It's because those with the power feed us that pop culture. Number two, we also talk of African identity outside of the way of thought or the roots or the philosophy behind it. We go to schools where we are taught to think like our slave masters. And then everything, even when we question our own identity, we question it from a Eurocentric point of view. We never question it from an Afrocentric point of view.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Well, let me take it back to our panelists. And Maite, let me also take it back to you, especially with the issues of culture and just hearing some of the comments coming through. What comes to mind?
You find that these are, like for instance, like the African-American hip-hop regime that we all know that the youth just are like so fascinated about. I mean, they took something that was theirs, that the only thing they could identify with at that time, because they were also, disassociated from where they came from, and they just started their own culture and they brought it forward. They just decided to be proud of, the circumstances that they come from. And it's amazing that instead of young people in South Africa doing that themselves and saying that I'll be proud, let me just do my own thing as, with what I come from. But it was different. They would look somewhere else. So as the gentleman said, I think it's that thing of colonization where you think that we are just not good enough. There is that sense of that, hey, like what can you contribute? There is that mentality that we can't, and that is why we think other people are better than us. Obviously, since you're overseas, you have to be better. Since you're white, you have to be better. But what's ours? We have that mentality, or it has been, embedded in us.
Let me bring it back to you, Kos, especially when we touch on conscious parenting. How does that affect conscious parenting, and where does the psyche then come from?
Okay, so our psyche, is a sense of self that develops from the identification. So when we're saying to be human, a defining feature of being human is we say to be human is social, is to be social. And what does social mean? It means we are socialized into who we are through significant socially referent others. In other words, who are we with? So as a person, I get to see who I am through how others see me and tell me about who I am.
All right, well, let me take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be hearing more recommendations and just way forward, not only from our panelists, but also from our audience members. You're watching Sunday Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Live. Well, our poll question for today is, well, we ask whether it is a crisis if today's youth identifies more with the West than with Africa. And we're looking forward, of course, to your engagement. Thank you so much to everyone that's on Twitter and Facebook engaging on the topic at this very moment, and continue to do so. But for now, though, we want to hear more, of course, from our audience members on issues of identity, issues of preserving African identity, and how the West, of course, has influenced our identity for now. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone with a question or comment?
So we're speaking about South African youth, and my understanding of South African youth is quite a diverse group. I mean, I sit here as a white person, and I count myself as being part of a South African youth, and I'm aware of non-African members to South African youth. And my question really to the panel, maybe even to the audience, is today's topic something we should be extending to non-African youth? And I ask, should we do this? Because I don't just want to assume that we should, because I think that that's something that white people in South Africa do a lot. And in thinking about this, it's funny that we're having this conversation today, because I am trying to understand what African-ness is. How do I come to embody this thing? What is it? How do I deserve to be here? What is it to be African?
All right, thank you so much, Carl. We'll take it back to our panelists in a moment. But let's take more comments or questions.
My name's Nolo, and I don't have a question as much as I do a comment. I just think that heritage is a key idea in how we construct our national identity. And I think more than anything, when we talk about youth, we're talking about an idea that unites people. If you talk about Africanness, we're talking about an uniting ideal. And I think more than anything, I don't think there's a collective agreement on what being African is, or what being South African is, let alone that. And so I think for me, that is very, very fundamental in moving forward. And so what I do believe in is we can empathize, and we should empathize with our history. But I do think it's time for young South Africans to become pragmatic about defining what it means to be young and to be South African. And what are those ideals? And we need to make sure that those, understanding our history, that those ideals by and large remain immaterial, understanding inequality, understanding that people come from different people groups, understanding that so many of us, even me sitting here, have a mixed lineage. We need to be careful as well of sort of making the debate and cutting it along the lines of African and non-African, or sort of black and white, whereas I think even within the black African community, a broader conversation needs to be had about what is being African and what unites us and what are the ideals that we stand for. Because I think, as she said, in a shifting culture, it is the ideals that keep us together, let alone the things that we see materially.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the comment. The ladies behind you.
Hi, my name is Simbongile. I'm a VIT student in African Languages and Media Studies. I have a comment as well. Just the sense that identity, you know, we as young people, we are exposed to so much world knowledge. I think it's not fair to say, are we becoming Western, when we're actually, it's a matter of globalization.
My name is Tsepo Muloy, UJ. So I want to just from the onset say I'm not an African, and I reject anything that refers to me as such, because I'm listening to words here which I find problematic: post-apartheid, post-colonial, whereas there's nothing post about any of those circumstances. We're still in that situation. And I mean, the very reference that you're calling yourselves Africans without problematizing what that is and what that comes from, the very idea of Africa, the etymological premise of that word, a lot of people who claim they're Africans don't have a clue about the history of how that came to be. So, you know, to be saying non-Africans, Africans, us and them is really problematic.
Well, let me take it back to our panelists, and just before we close off the show, very heavy, very significant comments and questions coming there. But let's start off with the one from Carla, if I got your name correctly. Should we extend the conversation to non-Africans, the topic at large, and, you know, of course, issues around whether the movement as well is responsible for shaping how young people are today? I'll start with you, Kosi, please.
And the question is, who am I to determine that boundary of whether we should or shouldn't? You know, and look, again, here, there are trans-discourse boundaries. We're talking psycho, social, political dimensions that we're talking about. And where is the line? You know, and I mean, for one, if as you asking that question, I wondered to myself, one of the questions that we've asked before was around, why is it that Africans, when they go overseas, their African-ness is always, they're always reminded, they're African something. In Europe, they're still African, but when they come here, they want to just get one label. And yet when we go out of this continent and go out there, that African-ness, we always reminded, you never quite belong.
Yeah.
And then when you come here, it must be nice. Everybody must just be one thing. So again, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying these are questions that are, for me, ongoing questions. And I'm not sure who qualifies to draw the line and says there's a full stop here. This is ongoing discourse, for example.
And Maida, yourself, especially after hearing so much, comments
Yeah.
around issues of
Very
whether
relevant.
are we even African?
Yeah. Okay, fine. With probably the last comment as well, I think this is one of the oldest kind of talks that pretty much young African people have about whether the word Africa comes from that Greek scholar Africanus, or whether he gave himself the name when he came to Cambridge to actually come to his studies. So it's been a back and forth. I really wonder where we're going to get the answer, because some people prove that no, he actually got the name here. Some people said no, he came here with that name, and that is what that we adopted that because of its fascination of the continent. So I was really fascinated by somebody bringing that up. And with the issue that they brought up being like, should we extend this, all right? It's an issue of, are they like, are non-African or non-black South Africans in Africa, do they have their identity crisis themselves? Do they not know where they belong? Do they sometimes feel Dutch? Do they sometimes feel, it's also maybe an issue that maybe we need to engage with them. Like, do you identify yourself as African-European?
And you also get people have dual citizenship.
Exactly,
so
because
if anything goes wrong, I always have something in the back of my pocket that can go somewhere. Whereas where do we go?
Yeah, this is the only thing we know. Yeah. So that's maybe a discussion. But then you find that other young, maybe actually white people who maybe go to schools, a lot of black kids, right? They identify with the Kwaito, with the culture, and from the way they dress, from how they dance, how they what, like. It's Kasia culture, So it's a thing of what you feel comfortable in, and do you have an identity issue? What do you identify yourself with? But now with the issue of us saying that it's not fair for us to say that young people are getting Western while they're just being globalized. What's not fair is that you can't just say that you are getting exposed to Western culture and just consuming. What are you contributing to the global world? You are feeding off the Asian culture and the American culture. What are you giving them? What are you ashamed of yourself? Are you ashamed of your culture? Yeah. You must also give as much as they're giving, and then we'll say it's fair, we are getting globalized. But if you're just consuming, then it's not fair on you, on Africa
then it's
itself.
Not global as
it's
such.
not global as such. You're just
right.
consuming what you're getting from there, but you're not giving anything back.
Alrighty, thank you so much to Maite Makgoba, of course, the founder of Mopi Mpopi, and to yourself, Kosichana, psychologist, and to our audience members for joining us this evening. I wish we had more time so we can delve deeper into this topic, but unfortunately we only had 24 minutes for the show. But thank you so much to you at home for not only joining us, but for also engaging on the topic on social media. We see all your comments on Twitter and Facebook. Continue taking the conversation further and engage, of course, in this conversation with your peers at home. But from myself, Tumelo Mutudwan, it's been a great evening. I'll see you again next week. Goodbye.
Sometimes it does feel like, as white South Africans, where do we fit, and are we welcome in the country, and what is our role?
Because it's Heritage Month, I want them to embrace their South African culture. As much as we are Indians, we are born here in South Africa.
You have to look back before you go forward.